Good afternoon and welcome to this, the third and last of a series of events the Institute for Government has been holding today to mark the 5th anniversary of the creation of the Department for International Trade and the birth, or perhaps rather rebirth, of the UK's independent trade policy. My name is James Kane and I'm an associate here at the Institute. A bit less than 5 years ago, back in May 2017, we at the IFG published a paper called Taking Back Control of Trade Policy, which looked at what the government needed to do to take advantage of the new opportunities arising from having its own independent trade policy. We argued in that paper that the government needed a clear trade strategy agreed across Whitehall. Well, we still haven't seen a document published called the UK Trade Strategy, but you might say we've been seeing one emerge de facto over the last few years, and in particular with the agreement in principle of a trade deal with Australia announced, particularly over the last few weeks. But the disagreements reported in Cabinet over what the UK should give Australia on agricultural trade to secure that deal suggest that not everyone is signed up to the UK strategy. So does the UK have one? Does the UK have a trade strategy at all? And if so, what is it all about and who is it for? To help answer those questions, I'm delighted to be joined by a superb panel, so superb in fact that we have had to extend the length of this session by 15 minutes to get all of them in. First of all, we have Graham Stuart MP, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Department for International Trade and Minister for Exports, and the Right Honourable Emily Thornberry MP, Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade, who will both offer some brief opening remarks before we move to a wider discussion. Joining Graham and Emily on our panel, we also have Nick von Westenholz, Director of Trade and Business Strategy at the National Farmers Union, Anna Isaac, who I believe is on her second day as Economics Editor for The Independent, and Martin Bell, who is Deputy Director for International Trade at the Scotch Whisky Association, but is appearing in a personal capacity. Before I hand over to Graham, I should say that this event is on the record. A video and sound recording will be available within 24 hours. My colleague has already started live tweeting the event from @IFG Events, but do please tweet along using the hashtag IFGTrade. And we also want to hear from you in the event, so please send in your questions throughout the course of the session using the Q&A function that you should be able to see on your screen. And if someone else has asked a question that you also want answered, then do upvote it so I know it's popular and I will try to get through as many of them as possible. I should say as well, please do try and ask your questions as early as possible in the session to make sure we have time to get to them before the end. And with that, could I turn to you now, Graham, for your opening thoughts?
Thank you, James, for your introduction. As a minister at the Department for International Trade for more than 3 years now, of the 5 that it's seen, I've seen how far we've come. Because when the department was created 5 years ago, we had, in truth, in the UK, minimal trade policy capability. To put it bluntly, we'd lost our muscle memory as an independent trading nation. But since then, we've built it back up. We're now negotiating our own trade deals, striking deals with 68 countries so far, plus the EU, worth £730 billion in trade as of last year. We're now operating our own tariff regime, which is lower, simpler, and greener than what we had before. And we're using our independent voice at the World Trade Organization alongside our presidency of the G7 to set the standard for modern trade. Our independent trade strategy is values-driven and value-generating. It's in line with our plan for growth and the integrated review, which recognise trade as fundamental to our recovery and long-term prosperity. We are working with like-minded democracies to advance our shared values, from freedom and the rule of law to food standards, labour rights and data protection. We're also generating greater economic value by opening up the world's largest and fastest growing markets to our exports. We know that the richest opportunities lie across the Asia-Pacific, where the centre of global economic gravity is shifting. And that's why we're embracing the economies which will define our future. Our Australia deal is the strongest example yet of what we can deliver. This agreement, our first negotiated from scratch, secures huge benefits, ranging from zero tariff access for our goods exports to modern services and data provisions too. We've gone further than before in our Japan deal, playing to our strengths in services and data trade. But we're working on many more deals, such as those with New Zealand and the terms of our accession to the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've secured market access for our beef exports to the United States, and my friend, the Secretary of State, is in the US this week seeking access for other world-class British produce, like our lamb. Our Office for Investment is helping land high-value deals, while our trade and investment hubs bring home the full benefits of free and fair trade, supporting jobs and growth in every region and nation of this United Kingdom. In the last 5 years, DIT has been able to achieve so much, but this is only the beginning, as our strategy is not just about our success here and now, it's also about the next 5 years and the years far beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now could I turn to Emily for opening remarks from you, Emily? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to the Institute for Government for hosting this really important event and gathering together such an excellent panel. It's a real pleasure to be here. In 3 minutes, does the Department for Trade have a strategy? Well, I suppose on a semantic level it does. It has a clear goal, as published in the 2019 Conservative Manifesto, that by the end of 2022, 80% of UK's trade should be covered by free trade agreements. It has a clear and simple plan to achieve that goal, which is to sign as many trade deals as possible, as quickly as possible, covering as many countries as possible. And it even has a pretty blunt but effective approach to managing strategic risks, which is to treat anything that might get in the way of securing those trade deals as a complete irrelevance, whether it is concerns about human rights or workers' rights or the environment, whether it is effective parliamentary scrutiny, or even whether it is in the interests of domestic industries ranging from fishing and farming to financial services. And I'll go even further. By their own strategic metrics, I think that the department is succeeding. 67 non-EU countries signed up to trade deals, plus the European Union, and 2 more in the pump with Australia and New Zealand. According to the WTO's annual report last Friday, the UK was responsible for more than 3/4 of all the trade deals notified to the organisation in 2020. That's a hell of a lot of handshakes and signing ceremonies and press releases, loads of Instagram. And it also takes the department a hell of a long way towards achieving the 80% goal. So the central questions that I have, which I suppose we'll explore in this session, are not whether there is a strategy, but whether it's the right strategy for Britain. And I'll close with 5 examples of them. First, are the trade deals that are being signed maximising the export opportunities for key growth sectors of our economy? And are formal free trade agreements even the best mechanism to do that? Second, does it make any sense to put all this energy into, for example, UK membership of CPTPP, and so little energy by comparison into fixing the holes in our deal with Europe? Third, are the minuscule benefits of these trade deals worth the permanent damage that we are inflicting on our farming industry and the regulatory risks that we are accepting, ranging from IDS to uncontrolled data sharing? And fourth, for 3/4 of the world's trade deals, are we missing a trick by not at least trying to do something truly groundbreaking with them in areas like trade and services? And finally, given this historic opportunity to reset our trade policy for the 21st century, are we not missing a trick by failing in a moral obligation to make a priority of issues like human rights, workers' rights, and climate change? So those are some of the questions that I hope that we'll explore this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those were indeed some extremely interesting questions, which I am sure everyone on the panel is looking forward to exploring. Can I come first of all to you, Anna? What do you make of how things have gone over the last few years? Is it have we just had a sort of shopping list of deals, or is there a clear strategy behind it in your view from the outside?
I'm just struggling to unmute, so I don't know if you can hear me.
I think we can hear you, yeah.
Fantastic. It looks like it's still processing, but we're away. So it's been an interesting time for me. I started covering trade almost as soon as the department began. I think as we sort of heard in our opening remarks, both sides are true here, right? We have a strategy, and then is it the right one? in some areas it's coming together in a more coherent fashion. I think some of the consultation processes with business have improved, and they needed to quite radically, quite quickly. I think the problem is that we've set about having an independent trade policy in a situation where the most important trade agreement the UK has at the moment still in terms of proportion of its trade had to be based on a political problem rather than a trade-based solution. And so I think that's a difficult climate in terms of business relations, because for every other trade agreement we've had, a lot of the process has been about going to business communities and saying, what would you like to see? And that's come at a time when businesses have faced two crises. Fundamentally, more trade barriers with their likely single biggest trade partners, but also a pandemic has also got in the way in the last 2 years. So we have to remember that these two things have put a great strain on businesses' capacity to offer a menu of what they want to government, and that's been difficult for policymakers and businesses alike. It is also difficult to make trade sexy. So in some ways, you know, one of the most helpful things you can do for a lot of businesses in the country, and I know that Minister Stuart has talked about this before. I heard him at the BCC conference talking about the difficulty if you're a small business that's based on parcels. Now, imagine you want to import parcels from the EU. That's a lot of traders in this country. Let's not underestimate that. This sounds like a boring problem. It's huge. That has made your costs of doing trade go up hugely. It's put many small businesses straightforwardly out of business. But we aren't going to hear about that in the same way trade wins that are about opening markets. We don't hear as much about, you know, liberalizing the market in Japan for chicken. It is just hard to engage at a public level on the minutiae of trade. But I think sometimes we have had a comms-led strategy rather than you know, a strategy led by business interests. But as I say, I do think that is starting to change. I do think it's becoming a more productive relationship between business and DIT, from whom I speak to. I think also rolling over the agreements was an enormous challenge that can't be underestimated. I would slightly sort of contradict both of the opening remarks, I guess, which is to say that the UK did have a trade function as part of the EU, and some of the reasons why the EU's deals look quite Britain-shaped is because the UK was there helping write them. So it's not quite fair or accurate to say that the UK didn't have trade expertise before the department was settled, but it's true that there's been huge expansion because you've never had a situation where you've had this kind of simultaneous negotiation. So I think we've moved beyond the capacity constraints that were the biggest challenge for the first 2 years. We have just about got getting through a pandemic, although it still looks like if we don't sort out, you know, more equitable vaccine distribution, global trade will be depressed for many years to come. But we have a department that still needs to find a way to build up those relations with business so that they're coming at the right moment, they're engaging at the right moment when they are trying to set up these trade conversations, rather than coming sort of after the press release has been sent out, in terms of not just the agreement in principle with Australia, because that's one it's very important, but that's one thing that's happened all the time. You know, with, for instance, the India ETP, it's great to aspire to a free trade agreement. And I'm sure we'll hear more from the likes of Martin on this, but sometimes what you need is to get a parcel somewhere or be able to put your product in a different size of bottle. Those are hard things to get coverage on if you're not dealing with geeks like me. So we need to think about how you have a trade strategy that is the right fit for the UK economy, but it also is consistent with moral values and ethics going forward. But I'm sure we're going to explore a lot more of these points in finer detail, but that's been my experience over the past 5 years.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'd like to explore this point around whether business is actually driving the UK's trade strategy a bit more. Martin, how have you found your interactions with DIT? I mean, before the referendum, SWA was quite close to the EU's trade function as well. Have you noticed much difference? Do you find it helpful having an interlocutor in the UK?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, happy birthday, DIT. And I would echo the comments earlier on by colleagues in the previous session about you know, how much has been done in a short time, and I think everyone involved can look back on the last 5 years with considerable pride. But there's much more to do, and I think I would agree with the compliments, but also agree on the work-ons as well. It's still a work in progress, and I think when we talk about trade deals and FTAs, I think that's illustrative of the challenge, because if I look at the US, for example, for our industry, the biggest trade issue there for the last couple of years has been the Airbus Boeing retaliation. So on single malt Scotch whisky, which cost us £600 million. And I think in the public debate, in lost exports, in the public debate, we rather focus too much, I think, on trade deals and not so much on issues like that. And equally, I think Anna mentioned bottle size is very exciting for some people. For small companies, the biggest gain that they've seen, other than the very welcome removal of the retaliation last month, is actually a change in the authorized bottle size that they can sell in the US. So these are, for many people, perhaps not very exciting, but they are significant. I think what a theme I would draw out, hopefully in the next hour, is really just about connections. So if I look at a DIT, the elements of a trade strategy are largely there, one or two gaps here and there, maybe some quite significant ones, but generally there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's not drawn together. And I think what I see the work on really is to make those connections. So you have to make the connections between what your domestic agriculture policy, let's say, is going to be with your trade policy. You have to make connections between what you're doing in a market with what you're doing back at HQ, and also with international organizations, notably the WTO. So I think there's lots of good stuff there, and loads of really good ideas and great practice. I think we do need to draw it together into some sort of coherent whole.
Thanks, Martin. Since you've mentioned agriculture, it seems opportune to turn to Nick. Agriculture, probably the sector most affected by the Australia trade deal, certainly, and with a big place in other trade deals. How do you see the UK's trade strategy evolving as it affects your sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think Martin really touched on the most important bit right at the end there when he talked about connections. And when we talk about trade strategy, a lot of the discussion is on the specifics of trade policy or trade law. Actually, in a trade strategy, certainly the way we see it, it needs to be much more comprehensive than that, covering domestic policy areas as well. One of the concerns that really came through in the last couple of months when discussing with government some of the implications of the Australia agreement in principle, and it's no surprise that you'll all probably have seen the concerns we raised on the degree of market access into the UK for agricultural products in that deal. But one of the concerns that we had was, in discussions, it became clear that the argument the government was using was, even if Australian producers were to fully utilize that market access, and we accept there's a degree of uncertainty about that, but if they were to, which would mean significant increases in imports to this country, UK agriculture would be okay, because we would experience incremental increase in productivity in the UK that would allow us to continue to compete over the transition of that of the terms of that trade deal. The argument stopped there. There really wasn't anything behind where that incremental increase in productivity was coming from. What was driving it? Was it the market driving it? Was it government policy driving it? In fact, where was the modelling at all which showed that that would happen? It was seen to us to be a bit of finger in the air, and that's the concern, is that actually the trade policy here, which I agree with the others, that is beginning to emerge something of a trade policy, is in isolation of commercial policy, domestic agricultural policy, and other elements. And that, I think, is a worry. So we've gone off, we've beginning to see what these trade deals might look like, but they seem to be driven certainly more by political imperative than by economic ones. So when it comes to agriculture, where is the accompanying domestic policy that really will provide the environment and landscape for farmers in the UK to be able to compete? And without going into too much detail now, in fact, I think there's a strong argument to say that domestic agricultural policy and UK trade policy are actually in tension with each other and are sort of pulling in opposite directions. We have a domestic policy that really is focusing on higher standards, and that has to some degree, involve higher costs. Yet at the same time, we have a trade policy that really is predicated on requiring UK farmers to go toe-to-toe with some of the most cost-effective producers in the world. And it just doesn't seem to us that there's been, maybe in the last few weeks, there's been a bit of discussion and emerging thinking about that. But up until this point, there hasn't really been acknowledgement or a desire to take that really holistic cross-government approach. And I think that's what's needed now, is a much more joined up cross-government approach if needed. That is, of course, assuming that the government does want to have a thriving domestic agricultural sector. If it doesn't, then we may be going down a different route.
Thanks, Nick. I'd like to turn now to the Minister. A couple of our panelists have said that they had a sense at times that UK trade policy was being driven by political rather than economic imperatives. Is that a characterization that you'd accept?
Well, no, I think, this whole kind of top level trade debate, you either believe that lowering barriers and encouraging trade is a good thing, or you're a protectionist. And if you're a protectionist, you fundamentally don't believe that a country with high standards, high quality performance, high expectations, decent salaries can compete in a world where you'll get undercut. And if you buy that protectionist argument, which is a route to poverty, being sidelined, all the data suggests the opposite. The reason the world has seen the greatest transformation in human welfare in human history, more quickly than ever before in human history, is because people have defeated those arguments, and they haven't been able to show complete joined up, I dotted T crossed economic analysis of every subsector of their economy. They've accepted the big picture, which is you've got to believe in openness, and we put openness at the heart of our government strategy. It's the heart of the Conservative Party manifesto. It's in the plan for growth. It's in the integrated review. And those who come up with, who say, "Oh, we can't compete," they're fundamentally, it's a policy of despair, suggesting we can't compete. We can compete. We will compete, and we do compete. And just by way of, the world is full of challenges, most of all from the protectionists in various ways, at the end of this extraordinary period in which we've done more for human beings than ever before. People on the both left and right of politics have tried to tear apart and bring down the very global architecture and the openness which has led to this phenomenal increase in human welfare. And so if you look over the last decade or more, you've seen rising trade tensions. If you look at 2019, pre-pandemic, according to UNCTAD's figures that came out last September, 9 of the top 10 exporting countries in the world, 9 out of 10 in 2019, saw their exports fall. Imagine that. Who would have thought that China's exports fell in 2019? Well, according to the UN, they did. So did the US, so did Japan, so did Italy, so did France. This is a dangerous world, and protectionist arguments have always been there, and they always get political traction, and they're always against the interests of the very people they claim to represent.
Thank you. And just on that point, it's quite an interesting issue, actually. How does the consumer interest get reflected in UK trade policy? Do you think there is a danger that it's not making itself felt? And I admit we've probably done this on this panel as well. We've got government, we've got opposition, we've got business, and we've got journalists. But where are the consumers? Do you think that the consumer interest is making itself felt in DIT, Minister?
Well, it's chronically not felt. And even still, because of the company they keep, I find even those whose jobs is to represent the consumer interest seem to go native and start acting like they're a voice for the producer interest too. So it's a serious problem. You get it in all sorts of areas where certain parts of the supply chain are given some premium value, and massively more important parts of the supply chain, which would benefit, for instance, from lower cost inputs, are entirely wiped out of the story, don't get hurt at all. So it's very, very difficult. The danger is we reverse those incredible advances that we've made as a species around the world by opening up. And there's always a million professors and 1,000 producer groups ready to come along and tell you why, in their particular case, there are reasons why you shouldn't do it. And despite the fact that the overwhelming evidence entirely points the other way. By the way, just the one country in the top 10 whose exports did grow in 2019 was the UK, and we overtook France to be the 5th largest exporter in the world, just by way of giving us some confidence that we can cope.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Emily now, do you think the UK's trade policy is working for consumers? And is there a danger with perhaps some of the signs recently of producer focus, both looking at the government on steel safeguards and also at Labour Party policy around buy British and procurement? Is there a risk that consumers are going to get shoved out of UK trade policy?
So I think that it rather depends how we define what consumer interests are. I mean, I think that if Graham wants to go through with sort of red and tooth and claw free trade, then I don't know why we're doing any free trade agreements with anyone. Why don't we just lower tariffs, to all imports and let everything come into the country in whatever way they want without any impediment at all? The reason is because we know that in reality, the reality of life is that there needs to be some form of regulation. So, for example, it is not in Britain's interests, it's not in the consumer's interests to have a system whereby we might be able to get insurance whereby we use data from Europe, but there are protections on European data, and then we go and sign up to a trade agreement, possibly with CPTPP, without necessarily thinking through whether or not the protections within the Trans-Pacific Partnership are compatible with the agreement that we're already in within Europe. Now, if we get that wrong, and we could get it right, but the government doesn't seem to even recognise that there's a problem. But if we don't get that right, then certainly the consumers will suffer, because the system that they rely on for insurance will fall down. For example, if you look at what consumers say they want, they say when they're polled that they actually want to have food produced to particular standards when it comes to animal welfare. They don't want to have food that has been produced in a cruel way. They don't want to have their environmental protections undermined. And certainly the Conservative Party used to think that too. There's a famous interview that Michael Gove did on television on that Country File, is it called? I think I'm looking at Nick, on Sunday evening, where he said, we can't expect our farmers to maintain, the standards that we want, and yet allow them to be undermined by food that is produced in a cheaper way with different standards. Of course, we can't do that. We obviously have to have a trade policy that has a level playing field. It isn't just a level playing field in terms of tariffs. It's a level playing field in terms of regulation, and that's what's in the interest of the consumer. Now, if we just think that it's the interest of the consumer, is about price, then I think that we are fooling ourselves. It might be argued that it would be in the interest of consumers for us to have incredibly cheap steel in this country. I mean, we need steel for everything, for building buildings or for building ships, or everything. It's a core industry. So maybe it's in our interests to have it really cheap. No, because we need to be making it in this country, because it is a core industry. If we were to allow cheap dumping of cheap Chinese steel into our country, and for our steel industry to be decimated, we wouldn't have a steel industry. And then actually, do you know what? Not only would we as a country not be able to make our own steel, but we would be dependent on other countries who at that point could put the price up, because we wouldn't have a steel industry at home to be able to compete with it. So I think there are certain strategic industries that clearly we need to have regulated, and clearly there needs to be protections of. But if one was to listen to the siren voices coming out of DIT and out of the Adam Smith Institute, which is that we should just have free trade with none of the rawer and rougher edges knocked off them, then I think that we are not doing our country any good, and we're not doing any good for the consumer.
Thank you very much for that. I will come to Nick in a moment just to ask about the standards issue, but I will just flag one thing which has turned up in the Q&A, which is a suggestion to Graham, I suppose, that DIT already has a Director General for exports, but perhaps it should have one for imports as well, to promote the interests of importing businesses and consumers. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that's above my pay grade, James, but we have done work looking at the security of supply chains in the light of the pandemic. So we've done some work there, but generally speaking, we're not in the imports business. Just to come back, really, if I may, on what Emily said, because what she said bore had no relationship with reality. We have been absolutely clear that whether it's chlorine washed chicken or hormone injected beef, that our standards, which are set in law, are not going to change, and anything that is imported into this country does so. I guess in this august setting, it's worth going to and Nick will be able to comment after this, but when it comes to as opposed to the end product, and you look again at the production standards, that's where you get into the interesting conversation. But I've known people say, well, we have the highest production standards in the world, and no one should be allowed to sell to us who doesn't meet our production standards. And I was going, well, can you follow your own logic? Because as we rely on imported food, for instance, we'd starve if we genuinely think our standards are higher than anybody else's, and we're not going to let anyone else who doesn't meet our standards as specified by us, defined by us, and regulated by us, then they can't sell us anything. Well, we'd all get hungry pretty quickly. But I accept, and Nick will be interesting on this point, that this, I think the product standards, we're absolutely clear and we're not changing them. Production standards, we have to believe, and that's where I think the coordination point is a valid one. We have to make sure that we move in a way that it is compatible. But I believe it is, and we've got high quality provenance, we've got brands, we've got approaches that find a way to take something which is produced to a higher standard than some of their rivals to produce a similar product, and are nonetheless able to compete. So I guess the fear is if you ever have more expensive systems, you can't compete. Well, most of the top selling brands in all sorts of areas don't have the lowest cost production in the market, but they're still the best selling product in the market. So I would just say again that, not to shy away from that difficult issue, but also to recognise it isn't. It's not just about price, not just in terms of imports, but not in terms of production either.
Thanks. Nick, you were on the Trade and Agriculture Commission that the government set up last year to discuss these issues. How do you think the government's striking the balance between free trade and maintaining British standards?
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen. I guess we're all sort of watching, from the edge of our seats exactly how this plays out. And we're eagerly awaiting the government's response to the Trade and Agriculture Commission's recommendations. And Minister Stuart's absolutely right. There is a really important distinction between product standards, production standards. So when we talk about things like chlorine chicken and hormone beef, hormone treated beef, those do relate to the final product and the safety of the final product. And I think we are confident that the government has made some really straightforward assurances around that, which we're confident that will keep and will do the job, and will operate their own independent SPS policy that will make sure those standards in the UK are applied to all imports. But when it comes to things like animal welfare or environmental impact or climate change, those sorts of things, it certainly gets a bit trickier. And I think it's also right. There's some imports that might be produced to different standards, but which will be important for this country's consumers and businesses, and also which might not be an issue which is particularly important to people in terms of that difference in standards. It may not be important. So having sort of blanket bans, it meets our standards or it doesn't, and if it doesn't come in, is clearly crude and wouldn't work. So actually one of the things the Commission recommended, which we think is really important, is for government and industry and stakeholders to come together and do some thinking about what those core standards are. What are actually the standards which really do matter? They matter because they're what we require of our farmers, or because the public thinks they are particularly important. And then how do you go about accommodating those within trade policy? So incorporating them within trade deals, perhaps through preferential tariffs given to those produce that meets the core standards. And how do you actually apply them to imports generally? How do you go and get those standards accepted by international standard setting bodies so that countries all around the world are sort of raising up to your kind of level? Those are really important questions. They do need answering quickly because things are moving forward quickly, etc. But that whole issue around core standards, what are our core standards? What are the things that really matter to us that we want to make sure are properly catered for in trade policy is the key question here.
Thanks, and I'm sure we are all eagerly awaiting the release of the second part of the National Food Strategy, which I think should be in the next couple of weeks, and we'll probably have interesting things to say on trade. Emily, could I turn to you now? Do you have any thoughts on this point that you'd like to share?
I mean, I was just wanting to follow up on what Nick said about standards, because I think that it's right. You know, we may have, you know, the much vaunted ban on hormone injected beef and chlorine washed chicken, but there are an awful lot other problems too. Let me just focus in on one, which is the use of antibiotics, blanket use of antibiotics in Australia, which is used as a growth promoter in itself. Now, as Nick has very politely said, or has made clear, you know, there we are in the process of negotiating a deal with Australia where we still don't have an agreed set of standards in this country. So we've got the chlorine chicken, the hormone beef, but we don't have all of the other issues as well. We haven't had an agreement as to what the absolute basics are that we would not expect food coming into this country to duck below. And since we haven't had that agreed yet, it's very difficult, therefore, for us to be starting to be signing up to trade deals, because if we had agreed to this a trade deal with particular lacunae in the Australia deal, then sure as eggs, however they're produced, other countries around the world will be demanding the same standards, demanding the same deal and saying, well, why won't you let our beef that is produced through use of massive amounts of antibiotics into your country? You've suddenly now decided that you don't like it. And remember, you know, the deal with Australia does allow for a huge increase in the amount of beef coming into this country if the Australians were to use the full amount that has been agreed, and it's happening on day one. On day one after the agreement, they will be massively increasing the amount of beef that's allowed into the country. The Australians say they won't use it. Obviously, the answer to that is, well, why have you asked for it then if you're not going to use it? I mean, but you know, that's why we're putting this. When people talk about there being an emerging strategy, my concern is that we're in our rush to sign up to deals quickly. We're signing the deals before we've worked out what our strategy is, and we need to have some form of consistency, and we need to have some form of overall strategy, which we don't have.
Thank you. I mean, this question of strategy obviously involves what you want, but also who you're targeting. So if I could just turn the conversation now a bit towards where the UK is looking at. We started off with continuity agreements. Now we have got, or at any rate, almost got Australia. Where should be next for UK trade policy? Martin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, for us, it's India. And I think it's been really interesting to see how the UK has changed its position since the famous tilt to Indo-Pacific and the realization that the trade is an important part of that tilt. So if you look at FTAs, generally they're most appropriate for countries that are emerging economies, where you have the traditional trade issues, notably tariffs. And I'm contractually obliged to describe India's 150% tariff as exorbitant on Scotch whisky. And that is, all the modelling shows that if we could address that in an FTA, then it would be transformational. I mean, we talk about things being transformational for industries all the time, but this really would. It would treble our exports and make India our second largest market in the world. So it is a big deal for us. Beyond India, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and I think many would like to see the EPAs reviewed, coming at that from different perspectives, and I would imagine that that would be a priority as well. But when we're looking at developed economies, with the exception of the US, either there is an FTA in place or there will be soon. And the question will be, I mean, the future really will be tinkering with existing agreements to update them and to secure better market access. So Canada, Mexico, really interesting examples of how that's going to play out in practice. So the major emerging economies in particular, we would see as a top priority.
Anna, is that something you'd agree with from the point of view of the UK economy as a whole? Where should the next targets be?
Well, I think it's I mean, I wouldn't disagree with Martin in terms of where the key markets will be for whiskey, but in terms of the broader UK economy, that's a bit more difficult. So some of what's interesting is it is useful in terms of consumption, but also use of things like the services economy to look at that as a proxy. So those are growth markets for the middle class. That also informs DIT's approach, and you know, they have said this many times. It was in the Chatham House speech where Liz Truss laid out sort of her big vision for UK trade was to target countries where you see that population growth in areas where people are going to have more disposable income and therefore going to want the goods and services that the UK might sell. So there has been a coherence with the approach of with the approach towards some of those markets. So I'd agree with that. In terms of selling UK goods, absolutely. I think what's more challenging, if you look at the economy as a whole and not just in terms of exports, and I'm not going to bang on and on and on about imports because we're talking about a grand vision here, but when you are trying to match up imports, exports, growth markets, you do need to think about your industrial strategy at the same time, especially if the UK government's going to deliver on this big promise. And for me, the biggest promise has been trade equals jobs. That's been the biggest promise made by DIT, I think, in the last 5 years. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And I think what's going to be interesting is, yes, you do need to know where those growth markets are, but are you matching that up with your broad industrial strategy for the UK economy? Are you thinking through the supply chains for things like electric vehicles? Are you thinking through how you approach reform of your agricultural sector in terms of the replacement for CAP? And it's when you see the import strategy matching up with the export strategy that I think this trade equals jobs sort of manifesto might start to make a little more sense. So I do think there is a coherence, as Martin lays out, in terms of where those growth markets are and where DIT are sending some of its best and brightest around the world. People are looking at Latin America very closely within the department. So I think there is good work happening there. I think what for me is a concern at times is that I don't always see that fit within industrial strategy. We saw the Industrial Strategy Council removed from government. I know that there are sometimes struggles between BEIS and DIT in terms of getting a joined up approach between UK industry needs and in terms of things like trying to combine the trade policy with defence and foreign policy priorities. So I think it will be interesting to see whether or not those target markets are always the ones best suited to the resilience of the UK economy going forward as well, and the right trade barriers rather than just the liberalisation that some industries rightly are pushing for.
Thanks very much. That is a fascinating point and also fits with some of the things that have been turning up in the Q&A, questions about how well the trade strategy is fitting with the development of manufacturing in the UK. Graham, could I ask, do you have any thoughts on how well DIT is working with the Department for Business, with the industrial strategy? We spoke a bit earlier this morning about whether DIT should be merged into the Foreign Office, but how about a merger with BIS? Would that work better, or are you better off as you are?
Well, again, you're tempting me above my pay grade, but well, I think historically the trade elements have been either part of what is fundamentally a domestic industrial department, which struggles with its legacies to be a forward-looking department. There's always the balance there, but it's a domestic department with legacy issues, or the parts of it have been part of the Foreign Office, which is fundamentally not commercial. So it's certainly, maybe I've just gone native in 3.5 years, but I think having a dedicated trade department is absolutely the right thing to do When I was the investment minister, I said, despite having people in 118 countries around the world, the only Department of State with people all around the world and all over the country, that our number one job wasn't actually facilitating foreign investment. And my staff would look at me and go, what are you talking about? And I go, well, our number one job is to work with the rest of Whitehall to make sure that collectively they don't screw up the most investable major economy on earth, as suggested by the figures. So our number one job is to be joined up with other departments to have a coherent offer. So I entirely accept all the points. Well, the points about the importance of coherence, and perhaps no government will ever be completely coherent. But I think we're working really well with BEIS. So we're looking at how our export support should be better fitted with them and working together on that. So there's a lot of work going on there. Because if you're an SME in particular, and they're the ones where often we can make the more material difference, they just want to grow. They don't have this fancy thing about exports or trade. I mean, I meet really quite large companies that don't have a dedicated trade capability. I remember one of our very largest top 10 companies had only introduced it in the last 3 years, and they're in a highly regulated sector. You might think, what on earth were they doing before? But they didn't have it. So for SMEs, we do need to be joined up, and we're working very well, I think, with BEIS. And I think there is coherence on strategy. Take clean growth, for instance. We're really working hard on that, and I'm co-chairing a energy supply chain task force with Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the energy minister, precisely. So we are working together on the same thing. We're talking to the supply chain about how that transition can happen, and trying to learn the lessons from offshore wind, which has been a phenomenal success in terms of deployment, but perhaps hasn't delivered as great an industrial capability as we'd like. And we are really working hard together to get a framework that means that if around my constituency, for instance, sort of zero carbon Humber cluster, hydrogen, CCUS, biomass, a whole combination of things coming together. If that works, we really want to make sure that our policies are in place to maximise the industrial capability within this country. And from the beginning, that's not just building domestic business, that's bringing other companies in using our investment arm so they land in the UK. And then we can export. You've seen the success of that with us working closely with BEIS on the EVs, for instance. You've seen how the Office for Investment, which we've set up just in the last year, is bringing in significant investments in the northwest with Vauxhall, in the northeast with Nissan, I would never say it was perfect. And the nature of departmental life is it's slightly siloed, but we really are working very hard to make sure it is coordinated. And I suppose, again, if I was asked at a sort of high level, what's our, one level, I think DIT's role is to hitch UK business to the fastest growing parts of the world, to go back to what Anna was talking about, and also to, as I say, to then make sure that we, in areas like, sorry, I'm not making sense here. I was going to say our headline offer to the world is as a science, innovation, technology, and I would include education, superpower, because 3.5 years as a trade minister, I'm always struck by the correspondence between what the world's most looking for and what we're good at. And our capabilities in terms of cutting edge innovation, design, technology, and the education that backs it up is really important part of that. So, and that's what the IR says is our kind of central offer. And I think we do need to make sure that everything behind it, domestically and internationally, adds up to a coherent whole, so that we can carry on that success which we did see in 2019 and see it sustained, in which case we could then talk about the exporting miracle. But we'll need to recover from the pandemic first.
Thanks. Can I just come back to you on that point about clean growth? Actually, we've had one question about scoring new trade deals for climate change impacts. In the scoping assessment for the Australia-New Zealand deals, there was an environmental assessment, but it was a little bit, it was fairly short and high level. Is that something that you'll be working on in the final assessment for the Australia deals? And more generally, how do you think deals can support the UK's climate change objectives?
Well, we're seeking to use our trade deals in order to forward that agenda, and as we do on wider areas from human rights to labour, contrary to what Emily said earlier. But it's not something we dictate. Very often, it's like with the EU conversation. Why aren't you doing this? As if it was up to us solely to do it alone. It takes two to tango. And what we want to do is develop our engagement, lower the barriers, strengthen partnership, and increase mutual prosperity. And while we're doing that, we've got to use that to best effect. But I sometimes think, maybe it's just part of being opposition. I mean, Emily's great on questions, and so far I haven't had almost a single assertion. So it'd be nice to hear what Labour, as the alternative, as Her Majesty's opposition, what their alternative strategy would be, rather than the questions they'd like answered. But you'd sometimes think, to listen to it, that you know, because you can't have the perfect agreement in which everyone suddenly does everything exactly the way we want them to, therefore no deal should be done. And of course there is that history of various parties in Parliament talking about how they like trade and then never seemingly voting for almost any trade deal that comes up. Although that's not entirely true of Emily, because she's done both, even just on the Japan deal, where I think she didn't vote for when the EU did it, and then did vote for it when we did it, while saying that ours wasn't as good as the EU one. But that's a complexity which Emily would best answer.
Thanks. Perhaps I could ask Emily to come in here and just answer the question of what could we be doing to get more of what we want on climate change in trade deals? Should we be more dictatorial, more willing to walk away, or are there other things that we should be doing?
I think that that in terms of priorities on trade deals, I would begin with trying to repair the trade deal that we already have with the European Union, which is the biggest trade deal and is half our trade and has massive great holes in it. And I think that really our priority should be that, rather than spending time trying to score smaller trade deals that make very little difference in terms of our gross domestic product. So there's that. I think that when one looks at the free trade agreements that we've had until now, they have not been done on a sector by sector basis. They have been, you know, a little bit cut and paste, and there hasn't been a great deal of difference made. I think that we should approach our trade policy on the basis of our trade policy being an expression of our economic policy, of what is happening with our economy domestic. We should be looking at where are areas of growth. Where is the area of potential? When we're negotiating trade deals, we should be looking at how do we assist this sector? And clearly, green jobs have to be a priority on that. And we have yet to see on any of the free trade agreements any specific chapter where we have made any difference in terms of the trade agreement. That's why your question in relation to Australia is so important, because although there may be a little subheading about that, there is very little depth to it. And of course, we need to be working on that. I look forward to there being a much better agreement, I suspect, with New Zealand when it comes to the environment, when it comes to climate change and carbon. But I don't expect that to have come from Boris Johnson. I suspect that that will come from Jacinda Ardern, who will insist on that being a chapter within the free trade agreement that we will be agreeing with New Zealand. What I want to see is something as ambitious with Australia, but I suspect we may not get it. But I do think that what we should be doing is looking at things, but I think we should be more ambitious. I mean, listen, Graham has asked me, so let me just say, I think that trade policy should be an extension of our domestic economic interest. And I think it should also be an expression of our values as a country. I think we need to have a more ambitious trade policy for UK exports in areas of comparative advantage. So we haven't talked about professional services or finance or construction or engineering, the arts, leisure activities, education, green technology, all of these things. We need trade deals with bespoke chapters and provisions for these key export industries, and one which leads the way on mutual recognition of professional qualifications, on mode for trade and services, on raising standards for all. We need to promote our export industries, not just by new trade deals, but by improving the existing arrangements that we have, by doing all the hard work, the less sexy stuff, to break down non-tariff barriers, including those that we now have with Europe. And our trade policy has to also promote our values and wider priorities, whether that's human rights, climate change, or working for better working conditions for everyone around the world. I think that our trade policy should have proper parliamentary accountability, which it doesn't at the moment, and the government resisted in the Trade Act. I think that we have a golden opportunity to set the tone for international trade at this time, And given that we're responsible for 3/4 of the trade deals that have been struck in the last year, I just think that this is an opportunity that we're squandering. So there you are, Graham. There's a policy for you.
Thanks, Emily. Nick, I'd just like to turn to you now, actually. There have been sort of allegations raised of protectionism as regards agriculture. What would an agriculture-friendly UK trade strategy look like as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I'm always quite amused when we get the sort of protectionist accusation leveled at us. I mean, you know, you go to the shops now, you see how comparatively affordable food is in the UK. The level of choice, you know, is absolutely astonishing. Graham Stuart was correct when he said, I think, you know, the progress that free trade has brought over a couple of centuries to the developed world is extraordinary, and we all benefit from it now. So a position which says we need to be a little bit cautious about how much further we liberalize tariffs doesn't seem to me to be somehow protectionist or going to lead to you know, severe problems for UK consumers. So you know, that for us is important. It's about how you look to liberalize. You accept that the government is looking to do FTAs. They will involve increased market access, but do it in a way that manages the impact. And I think one of the things that gets missed, not by those I think who understand the details, but it does get missed in the popular discourse, is that free trade still involves winners and losers. And the idea that actually free trade is just unalloyed upside, I'm afraid, is wrong. Yes, you hope that there's a net benefit. Yes, you hope that that net benefit over the long term might allow you to compensate the losers, but just go and talk to the Australian automotive sector about what free trade can mean for some sectors who are on the wrong side of the comparative advantage argument. So you do need to tread carefully. You do need to understand, you do need to get the balance right between producers and consumers. And I think that's all that we ask for, so that you ensure market access into the UK is properly calibrated and balanced, that we actually get something in return. We make sure that the upsides here, and we really do want to be able to export more great British produce, not just Scotch whisky, but everything else that we produce in this country to countries around the world. But we also want to see how you can use trade policy to promote the sorts of standards that we're asking our own farmers to adhere to. And actually, how do you use trade policy to drive more sustainable models of production and consumption overseas, rather than an old sort of free trade model that just says we'll get it where we can cheapest, regardless of how it's produced. I think that's the old model. Let's have the new model that actually drives those standards up.
Thank you. Sorry, you froze there for a moment, Nick. Thank you. Just on that point around whether people understand what trade means, winners and losers, that sort of thing, I'd like to come to Anna, if I may, just to ask, how well do you think the government is communicating its trade policy? We've had some questions about public backlashes and so on. So if the government does have a trade strategy, how well do you think it's been making people aware of that and getting public buy-in?
Well, I don't think we've had a true test of it yet. I think has been the biggest problem is, and some interesting people, there's some interesting Antipodean people to speak to about this, where they have learnt what backlashes really look like in terms of what happens if you don't build people's expectations up in the right way. Implementation becomes very challenging because these deals not only need to get through Parliament, which is a whole process of its own, but they also need to get through broader public consent that is more than just being the government of the day. And so I think what we can learn from recent responses, I don't want to just focus on that point of the Australia deal, but it obviously is the most obvious example, is that if you are going to take that decision, it's a very costly political decision potentially to have this level of market liberalisation. If you are going to take that decision, then you certainly should prepare people for it if you want to have the smoothest possible implementation experience. And I think the reaction we saw was that not everyone was prepared for that news. And so I do think that there needs to be a defensive communication strategy as well as a proactive communication strategy. If what you're trying to do is build the best possible situation of community consent, because it really is true that these trade deals do get, they get signed. They often get signed many times over. But once they do get signed and they start to feed through to public consciousness, it's also about getting the next deal over the line and about the trust in broad communities that you have. And if you damage trust, it can be very costly. We saw this with TTIP negotiations and how painful some of that became for governments. So you can't underestimate this just because you get this particular uncomfortable situation over the line by, and I don't think it's quite fair to say it was pulling a fast one either, but by being prepared to take a bumpy ride, you make a decision to have a bumpy ride now by not necessarily preparing industry for a decision. That becomes all the more challenging later on, because the first thing you then are doing next is saying, okay, what would you like from the next trade agreement? And all of a sudden, industry is a lot less willing to engage. And then you have a hole in your process where you're trying to build the best possible deal for the UK economy. So I think in terms of communication, it is one of the most tricky things in the world to communicate, but you do need to communicate those losses very effectively and very proactively early on. You need to say who the losers are going to be, and you need to offer them a coherent plan. And I think that is something that DIT needs to learn from international examples, as well as from its recent experience with Australia from.
Thanks, Anna. You mentioned the next deal and potential controversies, which I will take as license to move on to CPTPP. CPTPP was quite controversial in all of the partner countries. I think it got over 1 million people marching against it in the streets of Tokyo when it was going through 5 or 6 years ago. Graham, do you think the UK is prepared potentially to see that kind of opposition to CPTPP? And also, how do you see CPTPP fitting into the UK's trade strategy?
Well, of course, well, in terms of your first question, I don't know. It'd be interesting to. I mean, Emily's just come out with a fairly extraordinary statement of Labour policy, which is so fixated are they on the EU, she literally doesn't want to talk to anyone else, which would certainly mean there wasn't a lot of activity at DIT, since we're not responsible for the negotiations with the EU. So I don't know whether she wants to revisit that, because suggesting because you think leaving the EU is a mistake, you shouldn't do anything in the rest of the world, does seem to me fairly extraordinary and a bit of an error. But I don't know. I'd be interested in the other panelists' views around public perception. It depends, I guess, what people get told. I mean, if they get told by a whole series of linked groups, and we saw it happen with the, as you say, with the TTIP before, a combination of issues in which were entirely false and some with probably some substance, and then all mixed together, it becomes very difficult. So Anna's right, you've got to make sure you don't win a battle and lose the war, because you've got to keep people with you, both the populace and industry. And so that getting that conversation right is challenging, and we have constantly to learn on the go. I think, I agree with most of the points that Anna made there about trying to get it right. So, we've got to make sure that are being convinced that the TPP is the right thing to do. 11 nations in part of the sort of fastest growing part of the world. We've got our Indo-Pacific tilt. The deals with Australia and Japan open the door to that. I can give you more arguments about why it's great, but the danger is that we don't listen to or anticipate the arguments as to why it isn't great and why it's seen as some terrible end of civilization for us here. So, I'll stop talking and be all ears, because that's what we've got to listen out for, and then make sure that we engage in the right way, learn from what we've done so far, and never get to that position which Anna painted, which I find all too credible, if we don't get it right, where we've sort of get something over the line, but we've burnt our credibility, and therefore we lose nerve within government and without to be able to do the next right thing, because we've lost the argument, even though we won on the last particular case. So that's interesting. The only thing I just add as a headline, which is always worth saying, is that the 13% of global GDP, I think, which the CPTPP members represents, coupled with our own, takes you to about 16, which is roughly the same as the EU 27. So in terms of the kind of global significance, it doesn't make it the same as being a member of the EU and all the rest of it, but it's a way of putting it in perspective as to how significant an area of this world is, and that we think 99.5% of UK exports would be tariff free. And you look at, going back to Nick and worries here about food and drink and winners and losers, and being honest about that. Well, meat markets in Europe are flatlining, if not potentially going into reverse over time, and yet in that part of the world you're expecting a 70% increase. So, I would say, if you were in the meat industry, given the state of the European meat market and the state of the Asian ones, you would be, I would have thought, far from feeling that you were being sold out as one of the losers, you would be cheering every step of the way, because the opportunity to get into a part of the world where there's real growth and where prices at the moment, Nick will be able to correct me on this, but I think for some of our common meats can be twice as high in Korea and Japan as they are here, which is why the Australians haven't been using the quota they've had to date. So this idea that all their ranches are ready to flood us, I mean, I can't predict the future. Maybe they will increase. But all I can tell you is that in 2019, I think they used 79% of the quota they had, and that was tariff free. So the place to be in the meat business over coming years is in Asia, and we're looking to sign the CPTPP precisely so that we can get ourselves on the inside of that and allow our brilliant producers of Scotch whisky, Irish whisky, meat and other products and services to access those markets. That's our strategy.
I will just come to Nick very briefly then. Are you eagerly awaiting the opportunities, or are you going to be more like your Japanese counterparts, the Norkyo, and be the leading voice against?
I mean, CPTPP is certainly interesting. And I was talking more about the bilaterals with Australia and New Zealand, which are huge net exporters of agricultural produce, small populations, large land masses. Opportunities for UK farmers in today's markets, I think, are small, and I think even DIT recognises that. CPTPP is different. There are markets there, particularly those who don't produce the sort of food that the UK producers are very good at, red meat, for example, and others as well. So yeah, absolutely, we think that there are opportunities there. There are opportunities also in North Africa, the Middle East, all sorts of other places. But of course, I think we have to be realistic as well. Those markets being in CPTPP are already very much occupied by New Zealand and Australian farmers, for example, Canadians as well, others. So it's not something we can just think we can walk into. And it is on the other side of the world. So I think while the opportunities certainly are there, potentially growing markets, and as Minister Stuart said rightly, good prices at the moment, it's still a highly competitive market with highly competitive producers incumbent there. So that's where it comes back to the point I made before about a proper strategy where domestic policy and trade policy combine to help improve the competitiveness of UK producers. And I'm afraid it's also going to need time and resource money from government to put boots on the ground in those markets to actually really help capitalise on the opportunities to open up markets and maintain those markets once they're open as well, and promote British food. So we really need, that kind of commitment to get the best out of those opportunities.
Thanks. Could I just come to Emily now on CPTPP? I mean, setting aside the question of the need to look again at the EU deal, do you think it's worth doing, CPTPP?
Well, I mean, on DIT's own figures, a deal with the Trans-Pacific Partnership will, over the next 15 years, increase our GDP by 0.017%. And that's Malaysia is concerned about joining CPTPP and can't be guaranteed to be part of it. When the government talks about the CPTPP giving us access to a burgeoning middle class market, effectively that is the market in China and in India, both of which are, and neither of which are in CPTPP. So, I think there's a little bit of kind of, of signalling, but it doesn't necessarily, and rhetoric, but it doesn't necessarily kind of amount to what it is that is promised. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've asked 236 questions of the government in relation to CPTPP. I think that, I'm one of the few people in the country that can actually say it, CPTPP, but that's because I've been in this job for a year and a bit now. But when the government consulted on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they only got 81 specific responses. I don't think it's something which the public even really know about. They don't know what it amounts to. They don't know what it means. They don't know what it is that we're signing up to. There's been an awful lot of tears shed for us leaving the last trade group that we were part of, but we seem to be just kind of walking into the next one without necessarily knowing the details of what it means. May I just, on the subject of rhetoric, just in case there has been any misunderstanding, and I wouldn't want this to kind of get into Tory rhetoric, the biggest priority, as far as I'm concerned, is to fix the big trade deal with the European Union. I find it weird that the Department for International Trade is a donut department and misses half of trade that we do with the rest of the world, seems to miss the European Union. But it does seem to me that there are, I would start by fixing mutual recognition of professional qualifications. I would make sure that there was a proper veterinary agreement with the European Union. I would work on regulatory equivalence for financial services. I would sort out the mess of visa rules for short-term business visitors. All these sorts of things are the things which business talks to us about all the time. And actually, if we're going to take a realistic, truthful look at trade and not just mention the word Brexit and think that we can all just run around the place, screaming. We've left the European Union. We want to get proper trade across the world. That includes the whole world, including our nearest neighbours that are the European Union. Yeah, we've left. We now need to make sure that we're trading properly, which does mean fixing the glaring holes in our biggest trade agreement and not getting distracted necessarily by false promises of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, as I say, according to the government's own figures, only will result in an increase over 15 years of 0.01%. And what is it that we're giving up in order to join CPTPP? I'd love to have some answers to my 237 questions.
Thank you. We are very nearly at the end of our session today. I will just ask one final question of the Minister. Right? Would you like to have EU trade under your purview as well? Do you think it would be helpful to bring everything under DIT? You've got the trade commissioners in Europe doing that work already in terms of boots on the ground. Would it be helpful to have the policy too?
Well, as a member of a government that has decided not to do that, clearly I wouldn't, because we are like the Borg and have just a single thought running through us all. So I shan't be tempted down that particular line. With the CPTPP, it is a fast-growing part of the world. Our exports are expected, business as usual, to grow by 65% between now and 2030, 37 billion, and lowering barriers further will add to that growth. And I'm not sure that government modelling, even that done by my own highly esteemed department, has a great track record in predicting the future. And all I know is that if you build closer ties, you lower the barriers and you encourage trade, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I expect to do the 37 billion plus a considerable amount more, and hopefully more than the 0.0 whatever it was, 1%, which one of our analysts has doubtless come out with, but we'll see. But I'm very optimistic about that, and I'm glad on the record that Emily doesn't think, even though it prioritises the EU, she does recognise that the whole rest of the world, where most global growth is worth some of her precious time. We're certainly going to keep dedicated to it, and I'm really delighted to you, James, and the rest of the panel for contributing to this interesting conversation today.
Thank you very much. And on the subject of modelling, I don't think we can ever do better than, I think it was Niels Bohr who said the predictions were very hard, especially about the future. But sadly, that is all we have time for in this event, and also the end of our IFG Trade Day. So I think I should start off by wishing a very happy birthday to DIT. I looked this up beforehand. Apparently, the 5th is the wooden anniversary. I don't know what that says, but perhaps it will be pleasant. Thank you very much to the whole panel for their fascinating reflections on UK trade policy as it's evolved over the last few years and going ahead into the future. And thanks very much to everyone watching, particularly to any of our especially committed viewers who have been here since 12 o'clock this morning. Thank you very much.